We're on episode 10 of the Disruptive Love Podcast. I'm David Bennett.
And I'm Jonathan Bennett.
And our goal is to positively disrupt love and relationships. And please join us in doing this by subscribing to our podcast at disruptive.love and following us on Twitter and Facebook at disruptivelove, one word. Now today we have Vince Guaglione with us today. And he's the author of multiple books related to self-transformation and visualization. And we have him on here today because we're interested in his most recent book called Confessions of a Middle-Aged Short Guy with No Game, an Average Joe's Observation from the Deep End of the Dating Pool. And that's what we're going to discuss today. What it's like to date as an average Joe. Vince, I read your book over the course of a few days. I'll be honest, I was really sucked in by it. I couldn't put it down. And it's not just because you mentioned one of our books in it, but that was a positive for us, obviously. But I really did like the whole book. The whole idea of dating as an average Joe really resonated with me, and I felt a deep connection to that, and I think a lot of other guys will as well. So can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to write this dating book?
Yeah, sure. It's funny because I was sitting around a table with a bunch of my guy friends. We go out to dinner on a monthly basis, and most of the time the conversation turns towards dating, relationships, and there's quite a bit of discussion about it. Anyway, one of my friends, he took out his phone and he passed his phone around. He had just gotten a message from someone that he received on Bumble, and he was kind of curious to find out how, what we thought. And what we thought of the conversation. So after we had all garnered our opinions, gave him feedback, I asked him if he could bring up his Bumble queue out of curiosity. And I saw that his queue was full at that point. And I thought to myself, well, wow, I've been using this app for some time. And probably the most I've ever gotten was maybe one, maybe two, people in my queue. And I thought to myself, okay, what does he have that I don't? How come his queue is always full and mine's always empty? And then I asked him. I said, "You got a bunch of people in the queue. What's up with this?" And he's like, "Oh well, I'll get to him eventually. But every time I delete it, it just fills up again." And I thought, wow, that's even more depressing. So I had spent previous 6 years. Most of the works that I've done have been personal growth, personal transformation. Essentially, it's following my journey, my path, documenting my thoughts, my emotions. But I never really thought about putting some of this down in a book about dating and about what it's like for me as an average guy. I know that the key here is when you're dealing with a situation like this, you're always kind of questioning what's up. So sometimes you really don't have details. You can only surmise or guess at what might be going on. So I thought, well, this would be great because, I need to explore this myself. This is one aspect that I always kind of had some ideas about, especially as a short guy. I mean, I read your book last year, and, I had already reconciled that. I always knew that somewhat, played a part in my lack of success. So I thought this would be a great, opportunity to actually dig in a little bit and try to figure out what's really going on and try to get some real concrete data.
Well,
That's where was the idea for the book.
And we appreciate you referencing our book, which is Size Doesn't Matter. It's a book for shorter guys, where we do outline, as you mentioned, some of the bad news related to it, but also some of the good news about overcoming some of the limitations of that. So I'm kind of wondering, what is your theory behind why a lot of guys just don't have game? Because you do mention game a lot in there. Mm-hmm. The idea of being charming, having this in game. A lot of people know what game is, but why do people seem to lack that? What do guys lack that?
Well, I think that's partly personality in a way, because you can tell the guys who have game, it's just like they walk into a room and they could work the room, they're good to go. So for many of us, the average guys who might not necessarily have that, we might be good conversationalists, we might have interesting things to talk about. We just don't kind of like radiate that heavy duty male type of energy in a way, or that confidence that some of these other guys do. And I think that the real problem is that when you're kind of you've gone through this process many times. As you know, I mean, as a single guy, and been single for half my life, in and out of relationships, but always didn't really have the greatest success when it came to dating. It's kind of like, you think about it and you think, oh man, I really don't, I don't know how to be that guy, or I don't know how to be like that guy that I see who's working the room, who's, you know, who seems to just garner that attention in a way. So it's very difficult. It's tough to reconcile. You know, you're like, okay, what can I do to make this better or improve my situation? But a lot of times we don't really come up with those answers. We're just kind of grasping at straws.
Well, we've noticed a lot of, in our work with guys, that there's often even resistance to this kind of thing. Like you say, oh, be yourself, you know, go out and get a haircut, whatever. And they're like, oh, yeah, sure. But when you bring up this idea of game or, you know, developing charisma and charm, a lot of guys are like, well, I'm not going to do that. That's making me someone I'm not. Have you run into that among people you've talked to? Or
yeah, I think I have, and actually I've kind of, you know, dealt with that myself, because I kind of feel like, you know, I want to be authentic, but it's not really who I am in a way. It's like I need to be a different personality, or I need some sort of different persona in order to achieve that, and that's a very difficult thing for me. So I can understand the resistance, certainly. There are things that you can do, of course, and there are plenty of blogs and podcasts out there that talk about, you know, how to improve that and how to actually have game. But I think even if you listen to those, it's like you have to kind of believe that you're like, I can do this, and this is who I can be, or this is just like an extension of myself in a way. So that's a tough thing to do.
So you mentioned average Joe. I mean, and I like that term, because you did mention the stats in your book. I think you quoted Jordan Peterson's book, which we like that book. We've read that. And you mentioned 85% of guys are basically considered average based on those stats, which is not a good thing.
Not really average, but
not a good thing
by
definition.
That's
true, yeah. And not a good thing in the dating world, because average in some ways means invisible. I think when you're talking about women, it's not desirable, not on their radar, unless you really get above average in some way. So what are some of the things that how would you define certain characteristics of being an average Joe? What makes an average Joe, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask here.
Well, an average Joe is, I think it's somebody who, you know, you could think of it as being nondescript in a way, just, you know, out there amongst a sea of other guys, other Joes, and, you know, we're all kind of like, we look the same in a way. It's like we don't really have any outwardly visible characteristics about us that put us in that 15%, whether it's, you know, looks, whether it's height, whether it's, you know, just a status or an aura about you. We're just kind of there with everybody else, you know, in the grocery store, at the gas station, that type of thing. So we don't really generate or garner any type of, I guess, we're not eye-catching. Let's put it that way. So that's most of us. Based on that study, if 85% of men are considered either average or less than desirable, I think that's how they put it in the study. Then it's like, okay, well, there's not a whole heck of a lot we can do about that, at least from a physical perspective.
Well, you mentioned in your book, one of the stories I really liked the best was you mentioned that you were helping out at a singles event, I think it was, and there was that guy there, a taller guy in flip-flops, right, and beach clothes, and everyone else, like, dressed nicely, cared about the event enough to show up in decent clothes, but he was the one that all the women liked. Is that right?
Yeah, that was a speed dating event. So we had 11 men, 11 women. And, you know, he showed up right before the event. He had the beach attire on. It looked like he just got back in from the beach. But he was a very tall guy, very attractive guy. And, you know, you had him and like 10 average Joes. And we had done our best. You know, there were a bunch of guys who, you know, they just had, you know, they were business casual. They had khakis on. You know, one guy had, a nice pair of jeans, nice shirt, etc. Anyway, I talked to the guy who ran the event the day after, and he said that none of the guys did well except the one guy, and actually all 11 women selected him at the event.
Oh, man.
All 11 selected that one guy.
And that's what, I mean, that's what the online dating stats just tell us, is that even online it's the same way, you know. There was a Hinge study that's fascinating that showed that I think it was 1% of guys got 16% of the women. So, and then 10% of the guys got 50%. I mean, it was just crazy the number, how literally average, I think the average guy, so 50% of guys were competing for 4% of the women on the app, which is crazy when you think about it. It's the same numbers you're basically getting. Or the numbers you saw were a little worse, I think.
They're a little worse.
All the women
that was definitely worse.
toward that one guy.
But it also demonstrates what you mentioned earlier about kind of the averageness. You know, even in that group of 11, obviously you would think there would be average would be towards the middle, but 10 were average for the most part. And that one guy who was different, you know, he was conventionally attractive, but he also showed up a minute late. He was a minute early, he was in beach clothing. He was different. He stood out. You know, everybody else was, David used the word I like for average, it tends to be invisible.
Yeah.
Not memorable.
Yep.
So that story is, while it's disheartening on one level, it also shows that if you can at least be memorable, and some people are gifted with height to be memorable, but even coming in beach clothes and kind of doing your own thing is also memorable.
So how did you get any feedback on what the guys thought about any of that, the guys in the event?
No, actually I did not. The guys, you know, if there's usually a break in between, and some people just wander around chatting a little bit, maybe get something from the bar or get a drink or whatever. But you'll find that like most of the participants will continue to interact with people, you know, the people who are there of the opposite sex. So the guys don't really congregate. It seems to happen before the event. Kind of like a little, you know, one guy walks in and he sees another guy and it's like, hey, how's it going? You know, so they just small talk until the event starts. But no, I did not hear of anyone. I didn't talk to anyone or get their experiences, at least from the guys and the guys' side of things.
And you mentioned another event too, where you saw women walk in, scan the room, and leave, even though they paid, right? And they paid, right?
Yep, that happens. That happens at every one of these. Guaranteed. There's always going to be a few, but it is kind of interesting because you know it's a big singles event, and to sit there and watch a few walk in, just kind of wander around, take a peek, and then walk out. I guess they have better options elsewhere. But yeah, look, trying to flag a few of them down or catch them as they're heading out the door. I'm like, hey, you're leaving. Why are you leaving the event? You hear all kinds of, comments. There's nobody here that really impresses me. I don't like the looks of the guys here. And they just go. I'm like, okay, cool. Have a good night.
So on a positive note, because we're talking about some of the more, from a guy's perspective at least,
a lot of
more
negatives
negative
here. A lot of negatives.
Yeah, I mean, from women's perspective, maybe it's positive. It's like, I'm getting out of here. But so what would you get? What's some advice you would give for average Joes to be less average, to stand out?
Well, I think the key is you've got to kind of be aware of all of this, and you want to kind of, in a way, get yourself above the competition, so to speak. So if you're at one of these types of events, dress well. That's key. That will get you noticed. At least it will get someone curious about you. So you do stand out in one way. Then be confident as well. That's another key. The whole point of this is to try to get your foot in the door, so to speak. So, and that's a tough thing to do. Just like, walk up and start up or strike up a conversation. But you have to be able to get your foot in the door, and dressing well certainly helps. Being confident, that certainly helps, and just be yourself. I think that a lot of times, guys will kind of, they'll kind of back away from that. They're a little bit, they're feeling a little insecure about it. They're like, oh my God, do I go up and talk to this woman? What do I say to her? A million things run through their heads, and in reality, all the women want you to do is to be yourself, be authentic, so they can see the type of person you are. You get your personality shine through.
Now, what about a lot of what you described is really good for in-person type stuff, but online dating is a very interesting beast in that a lot of even game is hard to get across online. Right. If you say, "Hey, I'm charming and charismatic," you just put yourself as a narcissist. I mean,
or showing you're not charming.
Or showing you're not charming and charismatic. Yeah. So how can an average Joe distinguish himself through online dating? I mean, all this started with Bumble. So what advice would you give for online interaction?
Well, when it comes to swipe apps, there's not a whole heck of a lot you can do because most of the time people are just going by the photos alone. So even if you're swiping left, right, whatever, they kind of will look at the profile after. Maybe they'll take a second and say, interesting, okay, I'll take a quick peek profile, but that rarely happens. It seems like it's just swipe, 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 and then after you get a match, then they actually look at the profile. And on those apps, the profiles are really short because they don't give you a whole heck of a lot of room to write about yourself. But on the more traditional dating applications, dating websites, I would say, you want to showcase your personality, but I think what's key is, and what the differentiator is just tell them about you, tell people what you're looking for. So, a relationship vision is a good one. If you can describe that in words and put that in your profile, then that would certainly help. Unfortunately, when it comes to dating apps in general, I think, I've been on there long enough to kind of see repeated patterns. And, it's just, again, we go back to the numbers where there's most of the people are competing for a small percentage of the available singles. So yeah, it does make it really tough. So, you'll hear advice such as, well, write a well-crafted letter to someone you find interesting. I've done that, and that has the same results as just writing hey. So it's just, but there are successes. So that is the good news. I think it's a matter of, understanding the medium, understanding what you're looking for, knowing how to use it. And that goes not only for men, but for women as well. So yeah, I know of four couples that met via online, and they're now married. So it does work. It's not all bad.
Well, good. Yeah, we know a study we saw recently was that a guy has to send, in order to be guaranteed a response from a woman, he has to send 58 messages. Yeah. So I think people who succeed in online dating, I think persistence and not giving up is a big key as well, because you're right. I mean, people just swipe this way, swipe that way, and sometimes there's no rhyme or reason to it. So in terms of height, sorry, Vince.
I'm sorry. Oh yeah, I was going to say, I think people, they become disillusioned with it because obviously women have one problem where they're inundated with messages. And then the guys have the other problem where they don't even know if their messages are getting through. They rarely get a reply. And I think, if your reply rate is 3%, so if you get 3 messages back off of 100 you send, you're doing well.
Which a lot of guys, I think, go into online dating and they don't realize that. They don't realize that they think, oh, this is easy. It's on a computer. I know how to use computers. I'll put a picture up, look at all these pretty pictures of girls, send a message, and there's I'm done, and then nothing. Then they realize it's a lot more complicated than that. But about height,
absolutely,
what would you say? Because what we found is that a lot of people bring up height, but they don't really know much about height. Like a woman may say a guy's got to be over 6 foot tall, but if she were to identify 6 foot tall people in real life, she couldn't pick out a guy who's 6 foot versus 5'9", for example.
Sure.
Or she may assume she's a certain height, and it turns out she overestimated her height by 3 inches, and the guy she has a crush on is actually under the height she put online, for example. So we find that listing a number for height doesn't really say a whole lot based on the real world. So what would your philosophy be on, like, listing your height? Do you exaggerate? Do you be accurate? What do you say about it? You don't have to give away any secrets.
I really don't have any secrets, unfortunately. Okay. I did hear that you could fudge your height by like an inch. That's about it. 2 inches is kind of iffy because if you are face to face with the person you've met and you're 2 inches shorter, you might be able to get away with that. But then again, that's not really being authentic. So you might, of course, have to deal with the fallout of fudging that for the sake of just trying to, make yourself more desirable, more attractive. There's really no way around it. I think you could get away with an inch, but that's about it when it comes to online.
Yeah, that's kind of what we've noticed. It's a real, for shorter guys, it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like if you come out and say, I am proud to be, let's say, 5'2", it's like, well, I don't date guys who are 5'2", but if you say you're 5'5", and she's like, well, I can handle that. Then you show up and you're 5'2", you're damned that way. So a
Right.
lot of guys feel like they have to dance around the height issue. You know, you're authentic and you're open about it, and you get rejected, but yet you hold it back and you don't talk about it, and you get rejected. So I see why some guys can think this is their big conundrum. I mean, I look back at my time, and we were talking about this just yesterday, that, you know, we always blamed height for why we didn't get dates, but really, we only got that feedback. I got that feedback one time.
I don't think I ever did.
He never did. And this girl was, I think, 5'11", and so she's like, I think you're just a little too short for me. And I mean, she wasn't even rude about it, and I must have internalized that, but you know, it probably, looking back, it was probably more her insecurity. You know, I asked her to homecoming, so she would have been in heels at, I mean, depending on how big they were, she would have been like a giant at 6'2", and she probably, even if she wanted to, would have had a problem with that. But I let that define me, and that was a real mistake.
Oh, sure. That's, you know, that's part of the reason why I wrote this book, because I wanted, not only do I, you know, share a lot of this information, but I share my whole dating history, and how my lack of height affected me, you know, in the formative years, and then through my 20s and into my early 30s. So, you know, I can empathize with the other guys that are going through this, especially when you notice that, you know, all your friends are growing, you know, as a teenager, and you see all the girls that you knew all being drawn to your friends, but not you. So it's kind of like early on, we kind of you know, have to deal with this, but we don't know exactly what we're seeing. We can only guess, and there's something within us that tells us, okay, there's something not right. I'm different from these guys. I'm shorter than these guys. Those girls are all, you know, approaching them. They want to be around them. They don't want to be around me. It must be my height. So this goes way, way back, and I kind of share all of those thoughts with the reader.
That's really good. I just want to share a very quick story because it's funny.
That'd be good.
Well, I went down. I was an office helper in high school, and I went down to deliver papers for the teacher, you know, being the good, nice guy. And I remember one of the school's bad boy. He was on the taller side, you know, bigger, and he was in there from detention, and he left. And the student helper was like, oh my gosh, he's so hot. I remember thinking, are you kidding me? And what added insult to injury was the secretary, who was probably 45 at the time, said, oh, that is so true. And I just remember thinking, you got to be kidding me. It's like, I cannot get anyone to go on a date with me, and this guy is getting the admiration of the freaking school secretary.
Right. Yep. Yeah, certainly. And that's, you know, we see these things as kind of, we sort of know what the pecking order is. We can just look around and say, okay, I see how this works. I see who these women are going to be drawn to. Even if you do nothing and you're kind of like sitting back and you're watching things unfold around you, you can see how, you know, women are drawn to certain men. And that's, you know, that's happening on a primal level. There's not a whole heck of a lot we can do about that.
But I was talking, actually, Jonathan and I did a lot of talking in preparation for this interview, because we've been talking about your book a lot and the stories in it. And I was thinking the other day, though, that because we were trying to go back in high school and look back, okay, let's look at the people we knew that got dates and got relationships. And we really could think of a lot of shorter guys even our height and shorter, who actually had girlfriends. And we realized that maybe our selection, we were a little bit biased in a way. Like we looked for guys who were tall who got dates. We tended to ignore some of the shorter guys that had good-looking girlfriends, because we were thinking of some that did. In fact, one of the guys who was probably I don't want to say player, but he did a great job with women, was about my height or even a little bit shorter, and he had no problems. So that's it. That was a positive thing in a way, to think maybe, as you mentioned in your book, maybe there is something beyond height that is responsible for this, and maybe that's something that you can work on. And your book does touch on that.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, a lot of that has to do with, you know, confidence. Women love guys who are confident, of course. So you have to kind of get past, or at least reconcile in some way. Okay, I am short, but you have to be realistic about it as well. That might rule me out in certain situations or in certain cases, but that doesn't mean it's kind of the end of the world. And that's kind of how I took it, unfortunately, back in, you know, my late teens and early 20s. You know, I looked at it as the end of the world. Oh, you know, nobody's going to want to date me. So probably the easiest time in your life to date is your 20s. And for 3 years, I had 0 dates from the ages of 20 to 22, which is pretty bad. That's pretty pathetic. But I brought some of that on myself, of course, because I had this chip on my shoulder about it. But it is kind of interesting to think back and to understand, realize where this all comes from. So a lot of things happen to us. Our experiences that happen to us when we're in our teens, even going back before then, they really do take a psychological toll. So they have to be reconciled at some point if you want to move forward.
Well, it's funny you kind of phrase it that way, because I do remember, if you look at the stats, I mean, yeah, women do not prefer shorter guys, but it's something that's pretty common that they just ask that a guy generally be taller than they are a little bit. So really, we took the same view you did a lot.
Mm-hmm.
If we didn't even try to get dates for a couple years because we felt like it'd be instant rejection. When the reality is more like, okay, so maybe instead of being able to date 80% of women out there, you can maybe only date 50% of women, which means talk to 10 women and you might get 5 phone numbers versus 8.
Right. Exactly. The more people you talk to, the better chances you have. So that's one of the things that I also mentioned, the fact that, you want to just talk to everybody, no matter who it is. And that way, at least you get practice doing that, and it doesn't feel so uncomfortable. I mean, a lot of times, we will be, across from a woman, we think to ourselves, okay, I really want to talk to that, but she's out of my league. I can't do that. But if you get in the habit of talking to everybody, it's not as hard to just walk up and just strike up a conversation. So there's some items in the book that give you kind of like some practice ideas and thoughts. And, hopefully that will help. But I tried to do that myself, and I found that conversations were a lot easier to start and to engage in, rather than just shying away from them.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, this next question, I don't think you're obviously more geared toward guys and the average Joe side of things, but do you have anything that you would say to women, like about the whole dating process, maybe advice for them, or even just kind of help them understand what it's like for guys engaging them, an average guy?
Yeah, I think for average guys, I think the women, they kind of, in a way, and I'm not sure how prevalent this is, but I hear a lot of conversation about, oh, well, I met this guy, but, he's probably dating X other number of people and this and that. So I think there's some misperceptions out there. As far as the average guy, most of us, it's, for women to understand that we have to, get up the guts to kind of do the approach, even if it's a cold approach, that's even tougher, and then strike up the conversation and then try to engage in that conversation. That's a very difficult thing to do, knowing that any time throughout it, we could potentially be shot down. And then if we are, then having to pick ourselves up off the mat and do it all over again. Because essentially, how this works is, and how it's pretty much been set in our society for some time, is that the guy kind of does the approach. The guy has to take the lead, that type of thing. But it does get very difficult, and it becomes somewhat discouraging at times. So I think that there are some misperceptions out there about how guys view dating. Many of the guys are looking for that great relationship as well. I think that specifically in this age range, granted we're talking a bit older, like 40 to 55, 40 to 60, I think a lot of people have been through quite a bit in life, and they're not necessarily sure themselves. They don't know, they might not feel, the same about it. They might be more intimidated by it. And granted, it is a tough thing to date after 40, especially if you've been in a long-term relationship, say 15, 20 years. Yeah, it's a very difficult thing to do and to acclimatize to, in a way. So there are many guys out there that are dealing with these issues as well, and we're not, as I guess, wild as some of these women think that we are. It's just a perception thing. Guys have their perceptions as well. So I think that, that's really the issue.
We know some women who have, our advice has been, hey, go out, and if you want to meet a guy, talk to that guy. Go up and talk to him. And, I think they gain a little empathy for what guys have to do because, like, I can't talk to a guy.
Mm-hmm.
That's terrifying. What if he rejects me? What if he says no? I'm like, well, that's what we deal with as guys some guys on an hourly basis if they talk to multiple women throughout the day. I don't think most women realize how not only the pressure guys have to approach women, but also how terrifying it is at kind of a primal level.
Yeah, they don't realize it because they're getting approached all the time, so they think this is just normal. But yeah, it does take quite a bit of inner fortitude. You have to do it without beer muscles most of the time. To make that approach. Yeah.
So we're going to wrap up here. We've been really enjoying this, but what did you what was kind of the guy on Bumble? What did he think his secret was?
I didn't really ask him because he didn't, we didn't elaborate on it, but, he was just he's one of those guys that seems to be a guy that, always is talking to somebody online or always has a date. And, when I looked at it, I compared it. I was like, okay, this guy, he's at least in his profile photos, we look different. I'm short, but you can't really tell from a Bumble profile photo. But I am kind of thin. Little muscular. He's kind of the big teddy bear type in a way. So he just in his photos he just looks bigger, and I think that is probably the reason why he has accumulated quite a few swipes in his queue, for example. But that's again, I mean, that might just be regional. I'm not sure. I've talked to others about this and specific physical features, specific body types, etc. They think it is regional. I'm not sure. I don't have enough information, but I think that might be the case.
Now, you said in your book that he isn't super tall. Is that right? I think I remember you saying that.
Yeah, he's average height.
Okay.
Average height.
So maybe one of the lessons is take pictures that make you look a little bigger.
A little more imposing.
I think that actually is really good advice as we talk about in our book, and you mentioned in yours a lot, the whole provide, protect, show that kind of dominance. I think that would be great advice if someone, angles. I mean, we know women on their profiles, they use the angles to their advantage. So, guys take the pictures that, make you look a little more imposing,
Right. Yeah, I'm not an expert when it comes to understanding what works and what doesn't work in terms of online dating and types of photos. There are people that obviously they're able to do that, and they can point you in the right direction. I think that in general, though, it's another situation where you have to get your foot in the door. If you can, get that initial conversation, then from there you meet in person, and then it just goes from that point forward. So that's being confident, being yourself, being authentic. Showing a woman your personality. Bottom line is they're either going to like you or they're not. It's that simple.
Well, a lot of people don't realize that guys that actually get a lot of dates, you don't see the 50 times they got rejected in the last month. You just see the one or two times they succeeded. So it seems easy, but in reality, you're right. You got to put yourself out there with a high level of confidence. That's what the pros do, regardless of height. I would say. But I want to thank you.
Confidence is key.
I want to thank you for coming on, Vince. This has been really enjoyable. I really enjoyed
much.
this. I really enjoyed your book, and to anyone listening or watching, I highly recommend you get the book. It's available on Amazon, and Vince, I want you to share your website, where you can get your books, all that good information for everyone. And we'll put it in the notes too. That it'll be on the show notes as well.
Yeah, sounds good. I have a website, vinceguaglione.com, first and last name. Also, I'm on Twitter at Vince Guaglione, as well as Goodreads, Google+, Facebook. Actually, I have two other pages out there. One is a page for my personal growth, personal transformation work. So that's called The Narratives Keeping the Soul Alive, and that's actually the name of the first book that I had written. But the other page is a page that I started recently in conjunction with this book called The Average Joe's Dating Confessional. So it's a place for guys to kind of post, share stories, ask questions, look for advice, or just follow the threads and see what they find interesting. And if there's anything that might that might help them, that would be great. So the page is out there for everybody. It's a public page. Feel free to comment, share your experiences, or ask questions. I will... Granted, I'm not an expert, but I will provide my input and get to all the questions as they come in. So that would be great if they went to the page. That'd be perfect.
Well, great. Be sure to check out all the show notes for those listening or watching, and be sure to check out the book, Confessions of a Middle-Aged Short Guy with No Game, an Average Joe's Observation from the Deep End of the Dating Pool. Thanks again for coming, Vince, and we
really appreciate it.
We want to thank everyone for tuning into this podcast for this week, and be sure to join us next week. We look forward to it.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.